Joining me is Dr. Valerie Johnson. She's also, as I had mentioned before, Associate Professor of Political Science at DePaul University, and she's also a member of the IALHEA Steering Committee. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me.
I know that you have been very actively engaged in this whole process, as I will call it, of helping our community gain access to higher education. And you're very much in tune with some of the struggles that have been going on here within the state, as well as with uh, states outside, such as California, Texas, Arizona, etc. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as some of the problems that we're facing as a community with the conservative rights movement?
Yes. Dr. Ramirez talked about the assault on affirmative action in the 90s, and I think the 2003 Michigan decision certainly is a critical moment in that sort of assault on affirmative action. What we saw in 2003 is that on one hand, the court affirmed its support for affirmative action. However, because in the Gratz versus Bollinger decision, which basically was an undergraduate decision, because that decision was overturned, then of course we saw institutions across America sort of stepping back from their commitment to affirmative action. And so what we see now, universities across America, they just don't seem to have that commitment to admitting underrepresented minorities.
What does that mean to the average person in the community? Sometimes I feel that when we're talking higher education, there may be people that may be not necessarily seeing it as being relevant, but as you no doubt know, we oftentimes talk about pipeline, that we focus on working with students from kindergarten all the way through undergraduates, graduate, and professional schools. Could you sort of break it down somewhat?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. I'm glad that you asked that, because I think what people generally think about when they think of affirmative action and quote unquote racial preferences is that many of the civil rights battles have been fought and won, and that there are no longer any issues that we need to attend to. For example, I've often heard it said, oh, slavery has been over since 1865, the civil rights movement was over in 1968, and so anyone who has been left behind essentially because of their own inherent issues, sort of like personal behavior perhaps. But the truth of the matter is that we still live in a society where systemic bias prevails. And you see that, for example, in public education. We know, for example, that public education relies heavily on the property tax, which means that kids who go to schools in poor inner city and rural communities just don't have the resources for their education, their K through 12 education, as those kids who are from property-rich districts. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, kids from the inner city and kids from the suburbs are called to compete with one another. And what we're basically saying is that is an unfair fight. As Dr. Ramirez alluded to, I mean, when you have those types of inequalities, in the pipeline, then of course, what happens when kids seek college admissions opportunities? If you have not rectified those problems K through 12, then of course it becomes necessary to rectify those circumstances when we get to the college level. And so, in a nutshell, the issue is systemic bias and the continuance of systemic bias and how we dismantle that bias. How do we get to a place where we have a socioeconomic parity between African Americans and Latinos on one hand and Caucasians on the other?
Thank you. I just want to remind our viewers that this is the UIC Urban Health Hotline. It's a live call-in show, and the number is at the bottom, 312-738-10660. We're looking forward to your calls. Oh, we have a caller here. Caller, you're on the air.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Okay. I just tuned in, but I have a question.
Sure.
When you speak of property taxes and how things are divided up between inner city and suburbs and stuff like this, where is all this lottery money going to? that's supposed to
Good
also help
question.
these schools. Nobody ever addresses that or finds out these things. And it's another thing I would like to know. Why is it that they allow some of these public schools in the, especially in the poor neighborhoods, why don't they have a no-tolerance policy like they do in most of your suburban schools? I have asked this question before, and I was told, well, you can't just sit back and let things happen. You have to go knock on the door and let the door open and voice yourself. Well, a lot of suburban schools, you don't have to go knock on no door. This is just their policy. Why isn't it just the policy here in some of our neighborhood schools and some of our poor areas? I really do believe, and I mean, a lot of people will not probably go along with this. I believe a lot of the things that are going on now, especially even with the recession, this is the white man's way. He wants it to go like it's going. He wants our black children not to succeed. All this crap that's going on now, even this recession, this is the white man. He's going to get this back to slavery times. It's going to get to the point where it's not going to even pay for you to go to school. You're not going to have no job.
Thank you for that question and comment. Dr. Johnson, you want to respond?
Yes, the first question regarded the lottery revenue. And you're right. Typically, the lottery has been sold to our communities as a way to supplement the resources that are available for elementary and secondary education. But what you find is, in fact, the state uses that money to replace its own contribution. So instead of it serving as a supplement, it is, sort of like a shell game. And so the amount of resources are not increased. The caller is also right when she talks about the systemic biases that appear in urban versus suburban education. We have to understand that we do live in a class stratified society. And in a class stratified society, a capitalist economy, there are advantages that are conferred on some groups and disadvantages on others. Now, when you have these cumulative when you have biases, we have to understand that they are cumulative. They are generational and intergenerational. And so you're right. In many respects, the public school system does maintain class boundaries. I mean, that is the way it works. It sort of maintains class boundaries. But that is not to say that there's nothing that can be done. Because we know that there have been systems since time immemorial that have been unfair. And once we have challenged those systems, we have prevailed. And so I think it is important that we understand that heavy reliance on the property tax is not written in stone. That we can, in fact, challenge that and suggest alternative ways of funding public school education. We can also, of course, demand that the lottery money is used as a supplement versus a replacement.
Well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. I just want to get back on the topic of access for underrepresented students in higher education, because all of this is interrelated and interdependent. But one thing that came out of the IALHEA project is the video that has been hailed as one of the most informative, most dynamic projects that documents the history of African Americans and Latino in higher education ever within this country. Would you like to talk about your experiences and sharing with the audience what your thoughts are about that piece of work?
Right. Storming the Gates, in fact, is a very provocative documentary that chronicles the Black as well as Latino contribution to access and equity to education in Illinois. And it is an important story, particularly for today's generation, because I think it's if a people, and in this case African American and Latinos, don't understand the struggle that it took to have minorities on these campuses, they may take it for granted and then therefore not fight for it to be maintained. And so when you look at the Storming the Gates documentary, it was a labor of love. I think I speak for all of the committee members when I say that it was a labor of love, in that we interviewed I think it was 49 African American and Latino stalwarts in the higher education community. And we let them tell their stories, and that story is for today's generation, so that they can see, number one, what brought them over, and number two, how important it is that they be informed and engaged at continuing the gains that we have won.
I think that the audience should know that this video that we are referencing, Storming the Gates, it's available. You can call the UHP office, and the number, as was mentioned before, is area code 312-996-7727, and ask for DJ Wells, and you will be able to obtain a copy. I know that Dr. Ramirez and you, Dr. Johnson, work with students on a day-to-day basis, and I know the importance of Storming the Gates, since I was a very important part of that as well. And one of the things that you mentioned, I would like to know if, after some of your students, for example, having seen the video, did you notice a difference in terms of their motivation to succeed, etc.? One thing that we hoped to come out of that piece was that it would be an educational tool. That certainly the students today tend to have, different values, different contexts for everything. But I would just like to know your thoughts about it. But as I see, we only have a few minutes, less than a minute. So if you can talk about that real quickly.
Yes, I do think that once students see the video, they definitely have a different point of view. I think power, is derived from information. And so I think not only for our students, but for people in the community as well, it's important to see the story.
So I would like to encourage the viewers that are interested in obtaining a copy of that video, Storming the Gates, to contact the Urban Health Program at 312-996-7727. I want to also thank Dr. Johnson and Dr. Ramirez for joining us again, and hopefully you'll be able to come back later on this summer to follow up. Again, thank you for joining us today for another edition of the Urban Health Hotline. Thank you.